You know, what I worry about is our sustainability as humans. I don't think that a lot of us, myself included, 100% of the time are actually as resilient as we can be to objective truth and failure. And I think that a lot of what we're saying here helps us fail quicker. Brilliant. Helps us increase the probability of getting it right first time, but helps us get things wrong quicker. For me, when I think of mental health and I think of resiliency, I think of it as being able to, like a tree, being able to bend with the winds and go with it. And sometimes we get quite brittle and the wind blows and we fall down and we snap. So I'm wondering, Dom, when you think about sustainability and how we can use AI to help our products become more sustainable, is there a challenge here that actually as humans, we're not that sustainable and we're just some of us are going to find this whole journey hard?
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Here with Dom Heinrich again for the Product Agility Podcast. As you can probably tell by my voice and the fact that when you pushed play, it said the Product Agility Podcast. Now, Dom is back with us today because we're going to be looking at sustainability and product. And for those of you that perhaps haven't listened to Dom's previous episode, please do go back and have a listen because we explored some really fascinating and in a much deeper way than I have done previously, the impacts and uses of AI in and around innovation and product development. So some really awesome stuff, and I do go back and give that a listen to or check out some of the moments that we got on LinkedIn. And what was really clear from what Dom told us before was that he is an expert when it comes to artificial intelligence. If you look on LinkedIn, it will say he's a global AI leader. It will also say he's an innovation executive at TLGG Consulting, the co-founder of the Creative AI Academy, as well as a lecturer in AI at PRATT University. And it's an absolute joy to have him back for this conversation on sustainability, which is an increasingly important topic and one which we're going to have a number of conversations on. So, Dom, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Ben. And thank you for having me on a topic where we bring the both worlds together, the artificial intelligence and how we can build more sustainable products. I'm super excited about this.
I am too. So let's get straight into it. So the question I was going to ask was the question that we agreed up front, which is how can AI help us make truly sustainable products? But just as a quick caveat for this, when we say AI, are we talking about always going to Chat GPT? Or are we talking about a slightly different incarnation of AI when we're talking about how it can help us make truly sustainable products?
I think we talk about many tools and applications on it. In the last episode, we spoke a lot about ChatGPT and how can it help us personally to make things better. And the reason a ChatGPT or a BART is our first entry point is because it became so easy to talk to a model that has all this information about the world and allows us to have an interaction we would only have with experts, which we most often don't have access to. So I think as an entry point, that's great. But to your point, there's many deep learning and machine learning algorithms, just to narrow this a little bit down because it's not all AI, that can actually help us make a product more sustainable, move more sustainably around the world. I have a couple of examples I can share with you on this, but you're right. It's maybe the first starting point for us as product people is AI and the ChatGPT, but in the second glance is how can we actually leverage it in the journey itself, in the product journey itself.
And so how can we leverage it to be more sustainable? When we're talking about sustainable here, and perhaps it's worthwhile also just to add some context around that, because are we talking about sustainable that we can keep on adding to the product? Are we talking about sustainable because we're able to keep taking stuff out of the product? Are we talking about sustainable decision making? Like, is it about us maintaining our energy to keep on making important decisions and make sustainably ever increasingly more relevant decisions? Or is it, if I think back to the Agile Manifesto, the classic principle, which is we want our teams to maintain a sustainable pace indefinitely? What kind of sustainability are we going to be talking about here, Dom?
I would say we talk about how it can help us to build more sustainable products. I think that's because we often have the assumption that what we come up with is actually truly sustainable. And I think you and I had a little bit of a sidebar conversation earlier on the topic that just because I make something sustainable at the first glance doesn't mean that it is truly sustainable, because maybe the resource is still coming from a place that makes it not sustainable. And if it doesn't come from there, when we talk about recycling or upcycling, then what happens then? What is the next step to this? So I think from a product development perspective, it is a really interesting topic to help us understand them and understand the process, but also understanding what is really truly sustainable. And I think that's broader than carbon emissions. It's broader than water waste. It's also about the ethics around it and human rights around it, and how to use data in that space, and the machines where it's running on, the airplanes where we're transporting it, the waste we are generating. So I think it's multifaceted and it's super complicated. And I think there's ways where AI can really step in and help us.
So what we're not talking about here is sustainability with no caveats. We're talking about being able to create products which are relevant in the market, first and foremost, that are sustainable, that we can keep growing them, but in an ethical way, in a way which isn't having, how would you put it, an overly detrimental impact on the climate, or having any impact on the climate. That's we're laying on a number of really relevant and important things here, but this isn't just sustainability as in I can sustain a note if I sing for this many minutes. What we're talking about here is actually, this is sustainability for good purpose, to have a positive impact.
I agree. It's only about this. And I remember we had this conversation, Ben. Even if I'm from Germany, I'm not a huge soccer fan, but I'm a very big Formula One fan. There's a lot of factories in the UK. And the big goal is to be carbon neutral by 2030. And what does this actually mean? And it's like, just because I make synthetic oil now, or gas, where is it coming from? How is it being produced? And what are the carbon emissions by producing the synthetic oil is actually happening? So I think, to your point, there is no such thing in total sustainability. And I have a fun fact for you, once you're ready, about the biomimicry professor from PRATT and how he would take this. I spoke with him about the topic.
Oh yes,
you will not like it.
No, I know you told me this before, and I did like it, but I'd want to just take a quick detour before we hit that junction in the road, because that will maybe spark some other thoughts in people's minds, and go back to what you were saying about ultimately the law of unintended consequences. There's some really fun videos to watch on YouTube about the law of unintended consequences, which cover loads of the kind of mythical tales of the Cobra effect or whatever it might be, where we do one thing with the best of intentions, but it has an unintended consequence, a very detrimental effect on the broader system. The classic one was around, I think it was off the coast of California. They dumped loads of tires, thinking it would make an artificial reef, and then they just leaked out toxins for the last 50 years. It's going to cost infinitely more to repair that than they were going to save by dumping them in there. We see it in products. I think back to my conversations with Magali Pelissier. We will put a feature live for a particular customer, which isn't really in line with what we're trying to do with our product. And then that feature is a bit of a pain in the arse. It causes loads of support tickets. It's quite computationally intensive. The customer isn't really that happy. It ends up having detrimental effects on other customers because we can't give them the attention that we want. And we can't extend our product in certain ways because we put ourselves in the corner of this particular bespoke feature. We end up not being sustainable because we do what we think is absolutely best in this one particular context, but it isn't right for the product system or even in organizations. In one department, the marketing department will make a decision, not picking on marketeers here, but they'll make a decision to do things in a certain way. They don't bring people on the journey. There's no shared understanding. Ends up being what we're a very local optimization rather than a broader systemic optimize. And that's what we're talking about here, is how do we make these broader system-wide optimizations that are sustainable?
I think you brought up the most important point, which I think when we go back to how AI and sustainability actually fitting together is we don't know what we don't know in many ways, because we have a expertise and we have a knowledge and we're building, I would argue, in the best intent, even the marketeers, building in the best intent their solutions. I love actually dumping something on the marketing people, because I feel like I'm allowed to do that. I'm 20 years in that industry somehow, and I have good intentions about it. But I think sometimes we act with the best intent, but not the best knowledge. And I think that's exactly where certain AI tools can actually step in. Because suddenly I have a biomimicry scientist on my fingertips. Suddenly I have access to environmental data or chemistry reactions I hadn't had access to. The question comes, and Ben, I remember we had that conversation before, how do I act as a human being about this? Is my ego in my way? Or can I put my ego aside and say, wow, okay, there might be something I don't see. There might be something I don't see where I need to ask the machine to help me with.
It's that expert in your pocket, as you said.
Yeah, I feel like that's the beauty of it. I got a brief a few months back and can't really disclose what it was about, but it was sourcing ingredients differently for a drink. So it has the same taste, but it comes from local farmers, from local ingredients. And how would I know that? I have no capability of knowing that. I can use my educated guess. I can do some research, but imagine I basically modeled an environmental specialist. I modeled it in a GPT model, in an AI model, and it helped me run analyses on things I found, right, and ingredients I found, and told me how they might match together. I don't know if you heard of this, but mushrooms, not the psychedelic ones, mushrooms actually tasting like chocolate. So you could actually use them as a replacement for chocolate. So we worked on this with companies like Nestle, right? And so it's really interesting. I would not know that. But a machine can, if I prompt it the right direction, if I use my creativity on it, it actually helps me to explain me how it could work and how it could actually have that taste. So that is an interesting part where it can really help us in product development, because it can simulate things we are not able with. But if we are creative enough and think out of the box in that moment, it can actually serve us very well.
So is this, as a product manager or as someone coaching a product person, and I'm thinking, oh, this all sounds wonderful. Now, are we talking about coming to an AI tool with a particular problem or intent, or can we be thinking about this along the lines of something speculative? I am not really sure kind of what I want to find out, but I'm really curious if our product could be more sustainable from from what perspective? If I'm thinking of your average product manager who's got a software product or part of a software product that they're looking after, like what kind of thing could they be going to ChatGPT or Bard, whatever it might be, and kind of putting in there
their own AI model?
Yeah. Like, I mean, would they just be going to an AI model and saying, like, help me out, what are some things I should be considering?
I think there's a couple of ways to answer that question, Ben. I think if you're a leader in the space and if you're an organization that has certain processes you run, then I would recommend you to build a model that actually monitors all the ingredients you buy, all the products you build, so that you get a more real-time challenge on the products. So now I'm coming to the question you had, which is, what is the product person's job in that case? And I think the interesting part is thinking outside of the realm, thinking outside of the normal, challenge the norm. I give you an example, which is maybe not 100% fitting, but is easy to grasp for everybody who's listening to us, which is, imagine you buy a beautiful soap, very expensive. There's certain brands out there in black, good-looking bottles, but you want to refill them, right?
Yeah.
And you refill them with the cheaper market bottle, and the refill process is super messy. We both know that. It's like, if you have ever done that, I hope you never had your kids doing it, because it's a nightmare. It's getting actually more messy. But imagine you do this refill process, and if you use an AI for that to actually help you to optimize that process, which is meant to be more sustainable, then you will learn quickly. It comes up with all sorts of ideas which are really flat, and no human being would use them because it's too complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now go in and think about, how would this work in space? How would I refill something in space? Because it's not coming out of my bottle. And the answer would be vacuum. Instigating that question and thinking that way is what I would coach a product person towards, and say, think outside your spectrums, think outside your comfort zone, and go make this big leap, right? And make this leap into, how would this work on another planet? How would this work in a different environment? How would this work? And we spoke about this then in the last episode. How would this work for people with disabilities, right? And that's the moment where it actually starts opening a question that's provocative, which you might not have the answer, but the AI has the answer. And that's the interesting part.
Yeah, well, I wonder, it makes me think about conversations with Magali Pelissier and our last conversation as well. I guess for many, a very provocative question, whether you're a product person, a designer, coach, anyone really, is just to try and imagine, if there wasn't a user interface for my product and it was a prompt, how would that change things?
We will just go in a different way of UX. I mean, the user interface is changing massively, right? It's like, we're still talking about computers. And in the old days, you would have just had the conversation and maybe scribbled something on the board. And I think one of the things we touched at the topic sustainability in the AI design certificate course at PRATT. And what we do is we remove basically the computer and say, let's focus on a whiteboard, more sustainable. Not that the pencils are more sustainable, but it is, you don't waste at least trees. And so we start drawing things and start sketching things out, and starting on a different point and have a conversation with the AI. So for us, it's a way of teaching them how to integrate an AI into the conversation, which is super interesting because it can prompt you to think about certain things and sketch about certain things in a way that you would never do if you were just a couple of humans in the room. And that's interesting. That's powerful.
Do you get something that can actually see the whiteboard or see what's being written down, and it's processing that visual information?
Just take a picture and upload it. Bard, ChatGPT, other tools. And they can render it out of this. They can even code the website for you.
So give us an example. You've got this AI design course at Pratt. Fantastic, right? Like, is there a concrete example of something you could share? Because this sounds really fascinating. And I suppose if we're talking about sustainability, I'm trying to think of a way that this helps from a sustainability perspective. But I'm just also just really interested. Like, what's a concrete example of something that's been drawn and then you've been prompted and it's kind of got better?
I love that you go in that direction. And I think, to be clear, maybe my example is not going into sustainability for a second, but just imagine you make a sketch and saying, this is my joke website, right? And OpenAI actually demoed that. My joke website, here's a very funny joke, here's a button, press it to reveal the punchline. Take a picture of it, you upload it, and it writes you the code for it. And it writes you the content for it. The interesting part is the joke was very flat. So I have the suspicion that all the jokes on ChatGPT are written by a German because it was not funny. But I'm allowed to say this, Ben. But the interesting part is you don't need to have any coding skill. And now imagine, because we talked about this in the previous podcast, I make two connections to this. I'm a product person and the developer tells me it's impossible. I can take it and can validate that. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Now take the same thing and say, we want to do this and source this product in this way and fly it back to another country. Is this more sustainable than just leaving the waste rotting where it is? Let's say we use cocoa leaves. The cocoa bean has a lot of natural benefits. What we take out of them basically is used for making chocolate. The rest is being thrown away and is just rotting where it is. The question comes, can we reuse the material? Can we use the waste for something else? Nestle used it for water for longevity because of the benefits. But is that still sustainable, right? Is the transportation, I have more weight in the airplane, etc., etc.? Is that actually helping, or is the rotting actually the better process for our planet? And so these questions you would maybe not even ask yourself, but the systems would help you to actually identify them and answer them. And I think that's where the balance happens between automation, what a lot of companies talk about, which I think shouldn't be their focus, and augmentation. It's like, how's this balance happening? And I think that's the potential for sustainability, to actually not just come up with an idea that this sounds great and we can save on carbon emissions. No, maybe this is really, if you think this through, you come maybe on 5 other ideas how you can make this even more sustainable for the planet and even better, and source it somewhere else.
I think of sustainability, where my mind is going is, first of all, to a short recap, because what we're saying here is we have an expert in our pocket, which, and everyone who listens to this podcast is bored of hearing me say that this expert in our pocket is, well, the AI tools we have available to us are only limited by our own stupidity. We just don't know what questions to ask it. And as we learn what better questions to ask it, who knows, or we can begin to move. And like you were saying, that sometimes as product people, we need to think very out of the box. We need to ask ourselves very challenging questions, such as, what if there wasn't a user interface? What if we were doing this in a different country, on a different planet? What if this was picked up and used by someone with a disability? What if this was picked up and used by somebody who wasn't our target demographic? What would they think about it? And we can begin to explore all of these what ifs, and perhaps that's a good coaching question structure that we can begin to use with the people that we work with, to say, well, what if? And we just do there was a program called This Is Us, and they played this game called Worst Case Scenario, and they would all, in order to make themselves feel better about something terrible that was happening, they'd always then challenge each other to come up with a really awful worst case scenario, just to make themselves feel better about how crap things were right now. But we can play games like this. We can do, and this is something that I picked up from not a great place, but the idea that you reflect stuff back. So this is true right now. Okay, so what if that were false? How would that change our product? What ideas would this generate? And there's a huge coaching opportunity for us to coach ourselves, for us to coach other people, maybe for AI to begin to coach us in some way to help challenge us to come up with different and better product ideas, which is all fantastic. And then we were talking about that slight segue about the drawing, sketching something up, getting some prompts, making it better, really working on that design element. All brilliant. What I worry about is our sustainability as humans. I don't think that a lot of us, myself included, 100% of the time, are actually as resilient as we can be to objective truth and failure. And I think that a lot of what we're saying here helps us fail quicker. Brilliant, helps us increase the probability of getting it right first time, but helps us get things wrong quicker. For me, when I think of mental health and I think of resiliency, I think of it as being able to, like a tree, being able to bend with the winds and go with it. And sometimes we get quite brittle and the wind blows and we fall down and we snap. So I'm wondering, Dom, when you think about sustainability and how we can use AI to help our products become more sustainable, is there a challenge here that actually as humans, we're not that sustainable and we're just going to, some of us are going to find this whole journey hard?
We are habit creatures, and changing our habit, tough question. Let me give you an example. One of the companies I worked for a few years back decided to remove all trash bins from the desks of everybody overnight. There was certainly an email going around about the topic, and they decided to centralize it and centralize it with recycling bins. Do you know what happened? Can you imagine?
Tell us.
These recycling bins were trashed with everything. The desks looked like how probably we left our rooms as kids and got really in trouble, to be honest. It was disgusting. And while the idea was great, the communication about it was okay, but you could have probably done some more. Where the problem really hit the wall, or the solution hit the wall, was that the idea was in theory great, but it lacked the human laziness and behavior that you can't just suddenly change. And so when it comes to sustainability, and I think when it comes to how we can leverage technology in that space, is let's start with what I try to solve, and then let's start with understanding what the human behaviors are and how we can fold this in their behaviors. Because I don't believe in I have a great friend I dearly love, and I would love to mention Annie, who is a data guru in London, actually. And she really researches around behavioral change methods. And I think she's really successful in that case. But it is a hard topic, and it's not easy to solve and create programs that truly change the human behavior. And now we're back to your question, Ben. The only problem on this planet to be more sustainable is our desire of comfort, our desire of laziness, our desire of our unwillingness unconsciously to change, right? Because we're habit animals, and we are creatures in the way that I like to do it this way because it's convenient. The question for product people is, how do I identify that problem? And how do I understand that I can't change the human without a big effort? Maybe there's a solution I can find that can actually fit into this behavior. And that is my perspective where technology really comes in. And I remember we spoke about basically the single diamond instead of the double diamond. So approaching things by modeling and simulating. So train a model with what I'm trying to accomplish and then simulate millions of solutions, computational design basically, to come to an output that is really impactful. I think that's where AI can really help and step in.
What about organizational change? Because I think that there is a huge industry out there around helping organizations become more sustainable, helping their products become more sustainable. And people look at their organizational structure and the policies and processes and the rules, and they look at it. And I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard this in my career. People come to me and say, the way we're working isn't sustainable. We need to do something different. And so they say, we need to embark on some level of organizational change. And organizational change is always fraught with difficulties. I think in the agile world, there's a huge litany of failed, we use inverted commas for this, transformations that never bore any real relevant fruit. And I think even before that, there were huge organizational change efforts which never bore any fruit. I just think that when it comes to large organizational change, I don't think it should be a thing. First and foremost, just for the record, I think there are other ways of going about doing it. So if we're talking about sustainable change to help make sustainable products, and how can AI help us with that change element, which of course then does relate back to the behaviors you were talking about there.
Exactly. Ben, I know you are really keen on coaching cultures and coaching. Do you know the Enneagram? The personality insights system.
Is that insights or?
It's insights about so you answer usually questions, and it has 9 archetypes. That's why it's called Enneagram, right? And it has 9 archetypes, and you fit in one of these archetypes. And these archetypes have certain intrinsic motivations, certain behaviors, certain activation points, certain drainer points. It's similar to a DISC model, but it's going deeper psychologically into the system. And one of the people I work with a lot is Stella Sireno. She's a executive coach in the New York City, very well known. And we approach companies from that angle. So we go in and we analyze the Enneagram type of the organization across the employees. Meaning, if I have, as an example, a company that's dominant by a 4, which is the intense creative, I'm one of these. And we are always striving for uniqueness, right? We want to stand out. We want to do something and say something in a very particular way. You might have noticed, unnoticed that. That's my motivation, right? If I understand that motivation, I know that if I want to do an organizational change, I need to account for that, to take the majority of my organization with me, to make sure that it trickles down to the rest of the organization. I think these behavioral tools, and I know you asked me around AI, but the AI makes the analysis for you. The AI helps you to understand that. Yeah, I can tell you if what you're designing as an organizational structural change is actually working for the Enneagram types that you have in your organization. And so I think it's a balance, and we are coming back to the topic, which I know we spoke a lot about, is the human-AI relationship. There's balance between humans and our behaviors and machines, and then add the planet to this. And so I think what we will see in the future in approaching systems is less about human technology business. It's more about behaviors in a technology, aka data models, and context, right? Because context means, for me, culture, societies, organizational behaviors, an organizational behavior, a client behavior, a customer behavior, a consumer behavior, right? And they all fit into each other. You need to understand the intersection of them. And I think that's interesting, where AI can really help us to unpack these things. Yes, at speed, but also at depth, which we are lacking. We're based on assumptions most of the time.
With my mind suitably blown, I think we will call it there. It's been a really fascinating exploration into sustainability and a few rabbit holes along the way, which I think, although tangentially relate to it, I think are really important and very relevant for you to share. So thank you so much once again for your responses and your courtesy of kind of spending this time with me. I know you're a busy man, so I really appreciate this time. Is there any closing thought, something of import that you'd like to share with the listeners before we close off? When you approach sustainability, and I know we spoke about a lot about how technology can enhance these things, I feel approaching it from a perspective, this is just think through all the might not see and go beyond your fascination or excitement about a solution and be curious. What else could you said? What if? I think my takeaway would be ask yourself the question, what else? And I think that is what I would lead to, and consider the unobvious. Look at the waste you produce and what else you can do with it. It's the simplest way of going after sustainability, to be honest. I wish we had more time, because there's one particular technique that I use to help people kind of discover some of the non-obvious things. I always say that and I totally stole this from Peter Senge, the author of The Fifth Discipline, that if the solutions to our problems are obvious, we'd already be doing them and you probably wouldn't be talking to me. So we have to accept that the way you've been doing things and the solutions that you've came up with aren't solving anything. And the thing that will make the difference is going to be something which is non-obvious, which will probably rely upon you guys getting together and really talking and exploring this, creating actual understanding. And I think now, in this world that we are faced with, finding ways to ask that expert in our pocket, ask AI to help us through some of that more structured thinking to really discover those non-obvious points of leverage that will, over time, make a huge impact. That's why you're running the podcast. Beautifully said. Oh, thank you so much, Dom. I really hope that we do get to meet up soon. I know there's a loose plan for it. I'm excited if we do get to do that, even if it's just for a quick drink and to meet you in person, because it's been an absolute joy having you on for this episode and in the previous episode. As we mentioned before, people can find you on LinkedIn. It's like the place to find you. And if anyone is interested in having a conversation with me around how to find some of those non-obvious things, feel free to drop me a note on LinkedIn. More than happy to have a conversation around it. Dom, thank you once again.
Thank you as well.
Everyone, thank you very much for listening. We shall be back next week.
Thank you to all the listeners. Really excited to get feedback, by the way. Reach out.
Oh, yeah.
Challenge.
Reach out and touch someone, as somebody once said. Or challenge someone. You know? Reach out and challenge someone would not have been such a good song, would it? So anyway, I'm going now. Bye, everyone.